Welcome here in conversation with my dear sister, Maggie Jackson. I'm just really excited to dive into topics around her book, Uncertain, The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure. Maggie, thank you for spending some time with us.
My pleasure.
I'm really,
Absolute pleasure. It's so
yeah,
good to be with you.
yeah, I'm excited to chat. And, we've been in dialogue a few times already, and just thank you so much. Your work is like hot right now, and just like the momentum of it. I just think that it's so crucial that we spend more time talking about uncertainty, unease, and one of the things you said recently was around right before the 2024 election was around we need to become better at being skillfully unsure, and I thought that was really resonant. So yeah, how do you feel with your work? And yeah, just welcome.
Well, thank you. And I'm really excited and delighted to, be in conversation with you in a larger way, because the work of your institute is so interesting and then has a lot of synchronicity to the work I've been doing for 20 years in and around these big questions about what it means to be human today. And uncertainty is exciting. I mean, it's a very swampy, typically negative concept. It was for me before I backed into this research. I really thought I was going to write a book about thinking, and it turned into a book about uncertainty, which is thinking, it turns out to be. So it's a really interesting moment, and I'm very heartened because although we are very uneasy in and around uncertainty, if not downright scared these days, especially as the flux is rising, at the same time, I'm sensing a tremendous curiosity. Everywhere I go, where I speak, in young people, cross generations, different walks of life, people are curious and they're hungry. They're hungry to learn what we're all talking about, this concept and this mindset.
Yeah.
So that's exciting.
Yeah, and just to acknowledge the concentrated nature of change and the speed of it, from AI to climate change to political shifts and polarization, and just the ongoing challenges that are before us. There was a historian, his name escapes me, but about a few years ago, termed the cluster of issues that are the cluster of issues that are the multiple generations that are alive right now have to deal with as the poly crisis. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, in light of your involvement with a project we have going on, the poly opportunity. We'll talk. We can kind of explore that later. But so you have this poly crisis, and at the same time you have this concentrated layers of change that are happening simultaneously. Why is uncertainty exciting for you?
Yeah, and it is exciting, and it represents so much that has to do with curiosity and resilience and adaptability, even though it might seem a little surprising that it's an opportunity, not a disaster. So, just generally, when people meet up with anything new, when we as organisms meet up with something new or unexpected, we have a response, and we are unsure, just like a traffic jam or a stranger on a dark stretch of the road. You meet up with something new and your body and brain kind of react, and you're instigating a lot of changes in the body and the brain. So you're basically springing into action so that you can. So you recognize, first of all, you're recognizing that you have reached the limits of your knowledge. That's by definition our psychological uncertainty. You're reaching the limits of your knowledge. Well, you don't know what the stranger will do or if the traffic jam will dissipate. And at the same time, there's a hint of possibilities. It could go this way, it could be this way, it could be that. And so I think inherent in uncertainty is actually the idea that it's a space of possibilities. So that's a very important starting point for understanding. And it's also really important to understand that, of course, we need answers. You want to get to that appointment. Is the traffic jam going to end? These kinds of things. That's why we're uneasy about the question, living in the question. But it's not that it has to be fearful and disastrous, and it's not necessarily a negative. What's uncomfortable is often part and parcel of challenge. And that is, again, a kind of bottom line inherent aspect of uncertainty. So we begin to open the door and unpack it, and then look at the new scientific findings across all these disciplines, and suddenly uncertainty looks a whole lot different than this simple negative something to run away from.
Yeah, let's go a little deeper there around the findings, the scientific, what does the research say, and how are you defining it? Let's spend some time exploring that.
Yeah, I think it's important to just add a little structure again. So I talked about our reaction when we, to something new or unexpected or ambiguous. One scientist calls this the sense of unusualness that comes over you. And I love that term because that's what's happening. That's one kind of uncertainty, epistemic or psychological, our uncertainty. It's being unsure, as a starting point, although it takes a lot of different modes and guises. And I write about 8 different modes of uncertainty in the book. The second type of uncertainty, and really scientists now agree there are 2 main types, the psychological, and then there's the uncertainty out there. So very often in today's conversation, we kind of conflate these two. Uncertainty hits the stock markets, or uncertainty is upsetting the CEOs. We sort of talk about the uncertainty and our uncertainty as the same thing. But it's really important to say, yes, life is unpredictable. Life's always filled with mysteries. Right now, actually, the evidence shows that we are faced with more erratic climate. We're faced with more geopolitical volatility. We are faced with more unknowns, aleatory uncertainty. But the question is, how will we respond? And historically, I'll just add that humankind, at least mostly in the West, but globally, has responded to the volatility through probabilistic reasoning and mathematical modeling and risk assessment. We're all familiar with all of that, and it drives a lot of our world today. But what I think it's really important and empowering and exciting is that that's not all. It's not always a matter of just analyzing mathematically the uncertainty, rates of change, etc., profiting. It's also a matter of exploring the human response to the unknown. And that's really where I've been going.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'm just kind of allowing myself to take that in, and inviting anybody listening to slow down as well and to take this in. I spent a lot of time in my doctoral research looking at the power of mindfulness and its impact on the body, the brain. And one of the things that is one of the terms that was really striking was how mindfulness downregulates stress. Like it downregulates stress and it upregulates the feelings of well-being, feelings of pro-sociality, feelings of connectedness. And I'm trying to make a connection with your work there around how an orientation towards uncertainty upregulates us towards being able to hold possibilities.
Yes, and I think that is such a great point, because this response that we have, that our natural human response, if we don't deny, avoid, or retreat from uncertainty, our natural human response is actually very related to what you're talking about, to the mindfulness, the upregulation, to the opening up of the world without retreating from it fearfully or being overstressed. So when I mentioned the good stress of uncertainty, actually, the response that we get when we meet up with anything unsure is remarkably positive, especially cognitively. So at that moment, your brain becomes more receptive to new data, your working memory improves, and we'll talk about that a little later maybe, and your attention heightens. So scientists call this curious eyes, and I could go on and on. The cascading effects when you're just unsure, as long as you're open to that and lean into it and recognize that you don't know, that's critical. That has everything to do with mindfulness, because as you can see from me explaining these set of effects, that's really what scientists call arousal, but it's really related to the positive of mindfulness. So one reason people tell me, and this is doctors and leaders and educators and the general public, when they either are beginning to be trained in uncertainty or they learn about it, they call it liberating. That's that's the word, because they are, it's a form of good stress. It's a form of putting you on your toes.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of public speaking, and I'm also, a bit of a high nerve person. And for my entire life, I've never really known the difference between the anxiety that I know pumps me up, but also is precarious because you're being transported away to thoughts of fear and to thoughts of what are people thinking of me, and not thoughts of being in the moment. And so learning about uncertainty helped me understand mindfulness and also understand uncertainty as a form of honesty. Because when you're in tune with the world and you're not, at the same moment thinking, I want to, run away from whatever is going on. When you're in tune with the world, then you're on your toes, you're wakeful, you're open up to the nuances and to the, the small changes around you. And it's just a gift to be like that. So I really have begun to see this type of uncertainty. This is just one type, but this mode of uncertainty, the arousal of uncertainty, as very much related to mindfulness.
Yeah. And just to acknowledge your example of, public speaking and the anxiety that comes with getting ready to talk or being in a public, speaking setting, how that can, in an extreme case, can activate like what people term as imposter syndrome, and that's an extreme version of what could be this early onset of uncertainty that if managed right, it could be incredibly useful. I've since we've been in dialogue for some time, one of the things that keeps coming back to me was how this is it's fairly new work. This research on uncertainty is fairly new.
Yes.
And it's striking to me now because I'm asking questions around like, whoa, so then how does this work around uncertainty relate to neuroplasticity? Like, how does us orienting towards uncertainty in a way that allows us to feel comfortable with possibility, with change, with dynamic circumstances actually builds our neuroplasticity?
Yes, well, I think it does, because neuroplasticity is the root of learning. When you read something and learn it well, or even just feel changed, or it's memorable, etc., your brain has changed. You have created new synaptic connections. The networks of your brain have shifted, etc. So neuroplasticity is the root of learning. And uncertainty is highly related to learning itself. So for instance, this arousal, this wakefulness of uncertainty, sets you up to learn. That's exactly what it is. It's a signal, as the scientist told me, it's a signal that the old routine is over and whoa, something new, it's now time to update. So it's your body and brain getting in ready to learn and perform. But again and again and again throughout my research and my deep dives into the new scientific studies, I found that uncertainty was incredibly important for learning. If you think about uncertainty in terms of suspense. So uncertainty might be a kind of fresh eyes, curious eyes, but it also is inherently a space, as I mentioned, and that means a suspense. It means a disconnection from snap judgment. It's not a disconnection. It's what I think one of the root aspects of uncertainty is to understand that it's an investment in the better answer, not just any or the first answer. So if we begin to think about it in those terms, in terms of thinking, then you can see that pausing briefly after learning something particularly boosts your memory. Why? Because the brain is percolating and digesting and assorting and sifting and curating that new information. And what's really important here is that doing nothing is at the root of this, because we're not just made to act, even though, of course, we do need to do that. So uncertainty takes a lot of different forms that help with learning, growth, and change. Again, because you're open to what's going on. And it's also marvelous to understand how sensitive we are to uncertainty. So we live in a world now where, again, the mantra for so many people, they tell me is, but I'm always under pressure to give the answer in the meeting with your boss or with the client. You have to be the person with the instant answers. That's the product of hundreds of years of emphasis on efficiency and speed and all sorts of different pressures. And then we have devices that offer those answers immediately. People don't even look. Literally, research shows when we get the list of search results, we don't even look at the second page, but we certainly don't take anything but the first answer up, even if it's deficient. We also think that we gain a kind of hubris from looking online. We think we know more than we do, even if we don't find an answer. So there is a culture here that is leaning toward one, I call it kind of pushing us to one side of ourselves, because the quick response has its place. That's very important, but moments of pausing, moments of reflection, moments of attunement, moments of discernment are something we need to cultivate and calculate. And so getting back to that sensitivity to uncertainty, which is naturally within us, and I think we can tap into again, we have different brain waves for something as subtle as an incongruity in a sentence. So if I say to you, the very happy war, and scientists have done studies where people's brains pick up on that immediately. There's a brainwave called the N400 that unconsciously registers incongruity. So we're picking up things. We also have two different types of neurotransmitters that are really related to uncertainty. One is acetylcholine, which is, this is amazing, actually registers expected or routine uncertainty. So what that might be, again, the driving down the road, you've gone that same commute every single day, and you expect that there's always a tie-up outside of the city at this point. That's where you'll get a certain type of uncertainty. But if there is something completely, like you suddenly see a tiger crossing the road and the traffic is jammed, because that's the point where norepinephrine is cascading. So what a marvel our brain and our humanity is, that we can be that sensitive. And so are we willing to pick up on that and be in conversation with our unsureness, and then again be skillful?
Yeah, that's skillfully.
Practice.
Yeah, skillfully unsure. I want to just pick up a word that you said it, almost half said it. Cascade. You know,
Yes.
the cascade of in the example you were giving was the cascading of norepinephrine.
Exactly.
That
Yeah. And cascading effects as a result, as a kind of a domino effect.
Yeah.
That the release of a neurotransmitter hormone can evoke a stress response, which also is important to note is different from the fear response, because we have different stress systems. And just briefly, the fear response is that, as we were talking about with speeches and things like that, is a kind of cognitive shutting down. So you might be able to flee or fight or what have you, react sort of simplistically, but the arousal is putting you at the starting block of something more complex, something more complex, something more fine-tuned.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just kind of thinking with you and drawing that word out, because when we're faced with a moment of uncertainty, there can be that that initial cascading effect, right, neurochemically, and then depending on how we orient towards the moment, if we orient in a way that, okay, we want to be skillfully unsure here, we can hold the possibility, that space you mentioned earlier, and just hold the promise of what's possible here. I know not all situations allow for that or merit that, but from my understanding is that when we respond to incredible levels of uncertainty, and we don't orient in that way, it triggers the sympathetic nervous system, which is connected to the fear, the flight, free, or freeze response. So there's that moment or moments that between the cascading effect of being alerted by a wonderful sensitive system, that there's just a little bit of unpredictability here, and then the dysregulation that comes when we experience nervous system overwhelm. So it's just beautiful just to be able to slow down in this conversation, and even myself just become a little bit more attuned to those systems and name them.
Yeah, I call it I'd call it two things. Uncertainty is an epic chance to then open that door, go into the unknown, and then it's also a crossroads moment. I like to think of it, and particularly as far as fear and anxiety versus alerting and arousal, and I think that you're at a crossroads, and is the unease that scientists call uncertainty a signal. So the surgeon in the operating room who's suddenly unsure about what is happening has to pick up on that signal in order to drill into what's going on and is something wrong. It's a signal that the routine is over, and we're facing a chance to learn of the new. And so that's another reason why it's a crossroads moment. And one of the little tips that we can do to avert the fear and to lean into uncertainty is to be aware of something called outcome fixation. And this, again, will ring bells. It's familiar. We'll go back to the giving a presentation example, because everybody's faced that, and apparently studies show it's one of the most fearful things. People would rather do anything else. But if you are giving a speech and someone's in the back of the room who's glowering, but it turns out they're really actually just concentrating because they love what you're saying, and you think they're glowering, and so your mind spins out and says, they don't like it, I'm not doing well, I'm not going to get a good performance review. As you can see from what I'm saying, that's another cascade of kind of thinking in the moment negatively. And what are you doing? Well, what's really happening here is you're transporting your cognitive resources out of the here and now. So that's what I mean by not picking up on the chance of uncertainty. And outcome can be even reward. People get caught up with, how am I going to spend my bonus even before I finish the project? And, fear is a big, so it's really important not to fixate. No, we need goals and we need to know where we're going and et cetera. But you don't want to focus on the outcome too much because you're not going to be in that moment of uncertainty. And that's another reason why I call uncertainty edge work. You're at the edge of what you know. You're not abandoning or have lost all your knowledge or, all of your experience, but you are at the edge, operating at the edge. So it's frontier work, it's edge work, which is actually what Danielle Bassett, the incredible UPenn theoretical systems thinker and psychology person, calls curiosity, edge work. I think they are highly related. When you point your nose into the unknown with, again, awkwardly, uneasily, and yet willingly, that's curiosity. And of course, that's uncertainty too. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah. I'm kind
and
of
really related to well-being. Really, really, because there are studies that show there's a lot of work now in and around the curious personality. People can be passively curious. Oh, I wonder, but never do anything about it. Or actively curious, asking hard questions, looking it up, pursuing curiosity. The people who are actively curious are best at tolerating the stress of the unknown. So they are going to pursue the difficult, challenging things, the good stress, and that combination of kind of personality traits, highly tolerant of stress and also highly actively curious, is the package that's most related to well-being. So these are the people who get more pleasure in life, and they are certainly, wading in, swimming around in the good and the bad of life because they're aware, but at the same time, they have better well-being. Isn't that wonderful? That's again, it's honesty.
Yeah, that active curiosity is fascinating, and it brings up just a lot of even more questions around how we approach education and how we approach leadership as well, and cultivating environments for people to either learn or lead. And how are you scaffolding active curiosity? How are you what's the method? What are the methodologies you're deploying for developing the skillfully unsure acumen of the people that you work with or teach? Every year before a new year, I think about like what's the word that's gonna just be an anchor word for me. Like a couple of years ago, it was like manifestation or manifest or those kind of new year ways to orient towards a new year. And this year, I picked clarity.
Okay. Wow.
I picked clarity, and there's all kinds of reasons why, but as I'm listening to you, there's a productive tension with a desire for clarity and the realities of just things being uncertain, right?
Exactly.
And I just wanted to raise, as a recent book that I came across through a colleague. Title of it is Clarity, by this colleague named Jamie Smart, and just fascinating exploration of how to center oneself in the face of just a lot coming at us. So I think it's very connected to your work. And I'll just say one thing that he said that was really interesting when we're listening to each other, especially in the climate that we're in, where there's just so many different ways of seeing the truth, capital T, and that when we listen to each other, we typically listen to react. So, whatever you're saying, I'm already like, is it rubbing against, or is it gelling with?
Right.
Is it far from, my perspective? And what he says is that part of what's beneficial is to relax into listening to realize. Like,
Yes. Yes.
what do, regardless of whether we agree or not, the way I'm orienting towards you is not to affirm, prove any preconceived notion that I have, but rather, what is this conversation? What is this moment inviting me to realize
Yes.
about myself, about the world, about you, about this context? And I found that really powerful.
Very powerful. Yes. And in fact, there's related research about people who are more open, or personality trait as well, tolerant of uncertainty. They actually are more likely to argue to win. Argue to learn. Argue to learn seems related to the realizing. They basically listen, to the other points of view. And when there's a kind of a pause in an argument, they actually admit, I don't know, or they acknowledge the other's points. They're really right there. Whereas people who argue to win score points and want to just shut down the conversation. Score, score, score. And those are people who are more rigid thinkers, more tend to dislike surprises. Another way to put this, a metaphor I kind of made up as I was tangling around with how, the positive types of uncertainty, is to think of two different ways of looking at knowledge. So it could be knowing one another. It could be knowing, learning a foreign language. But if you are open to uncertainty, you see knowledge as a tapestry, whose very mutability is essential to its strength. So you kind of see the point you make, maybe is removing a thread of your tapestry of knowledge and replacing it with another. And, this tapestry is subtle. It's always growing. It's always weaving in between us, maybe, or within yourself. But people who are really close to or see uncertainty as threatening, they just want that normal. They want nothing to really change, honestly. They see knowledge as a rock that they hold and defend. And so this rock and tapestry, I think, helped me understand this is so big. And you're right, it's so important to, teaching children to the lessons that maybe we don't give in the classroom or don't know how to give in and around, as a parent, as an educator, in life. You've had a lot of real life experience with kids who grew up in a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, that's a great segue to think about just, early experiences of precarity in populations. And I know you wanted to kind of say more and explore that together. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear your field work, your examples, because part and parcel of living in this world of instant answers is acknowledging, understanding, utilizing uncertainty skillfully with strategies. But I also think a big question is learning from others whose voices we have ignored. So there is now a very important research movement to actually investigate, to unleash or to understand the strengths that people gain when they are grappling with precarity, unpredictability. So this can take a lot of different ways. There's new work on pastoralists, nomadic peoples, who are constantly having to be agile, and there's learning going on there. I did a particular deep dive into a learning in and around kids who've been raised who've had early experiences of precarity, unpredictability. So it could be kids who have been adopted, kids who had alcoholism in the family, kids who had lower economic situations in which childcare was not routine, families, maybe the structure of the family wasn't, set in stone. A lot of different situations, context, that then is related, it turns out, to these incredible overlooked skills. And touching on all of what we've been talking about with arousal, some of the skills kids are gaining, even though, well, bottom line first, I'd say, no one wants anyone to have to grow up in precarity, especially in and around survival. We shouldn't have unpredictability. We have to, as a society and all of us, work, of course, to eradicate situations where people have unpredictability in their next meal or their housing. This precarity exists, though, and what's been sadly and wrongfully done is that societies have, in venerating predictability and trying to control the earth and this, culture and etc., have kind of overlooked people's strengths, who have been raised in precarity. And so we might call this, just to put a kind of a label on it, but street smarts. It's often street smarts. So kids are really attuned to signs of anger. If they've been abused, they're really attuned to the world around them. Studies of young Black teenage boys in Chicago found that this high rate of arousal protects them against witnessing violence for over a whole year. The kids who had the most alertness were least witnessing violence because they could be agile and be nimble. So there are these amazing skills, and of course we need to have we also need to have skills related to sitting still and to paying attention and to reflection. You need to have those meta skills or those sustained skills. But at the same time, it's really important to understand the, these hidden skills from these kids growing up in these environments so that we can laud them for these things that they do well and learn as well what living in precarity can and doesn't do. And I think that one of the most important things is that I remember a teenager in work done by Jacqueline Lee in Baltimore talks about in his world, in his neighborhood of change, of violence, etc. He said, something along the lines of a plan B should always be, which is a great term. That is exactly what it has to be. And it's just to bring it back to sort of, others who might not have experienced as much precarity, people who expect change in an environment, in a meeting or in a laboratory situation, if you expect change, you're more likely to pick up, you learn faster in those environments, which is exactly what these kids do. There's studies, these amazing studies of adopted kids who are given a kind of a game with coins, and they might give their partner a reciprocation trust game, give the partner some coins, and the partner, if they give back, will give them more coins, and you each win. It actually turned out to be that the other person in the studies was a software bot, so the professors could kind of rig the game. Well, they had kids who had been adopted from international situations where the orphanages were not, very predictable or warm, and then kids who had a biological family. The adoptees were much quicker to realize when the game had changed and that other person they're playing with had become less giving. They turned on a dime, so to speak, and basically, that's that's really something we all can learn from.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the kids who had grown up with maybe thinking the world was predictable kept doggedly trying to give coins to someone who wasn't giving back, which, being adopted myself, I got a kind of a amusing chuckle out of that one. But I think going back to your
Yeah.
work with youth for so many years,
Yeah.
I mean, does any of this ring bells?
Yeah, it rings so many bells. I mean, personally, you know, growing up in New York City to an immigrant family, you know, we had experienced a lot of precarity in terms of our housing situation for many years.
Yeah.
By the time I was in high school, I had gone to almost 5 different schools.
Wow.
And for a long time, I viewed that in a negative way, but I noticed that it gave me this incredible skill to navigate so many different environments, to be able to be attuned to people's needs, and to try to, like, you know, find common ground, especially early on in a transition.
Yes.
And then, so personally, I can relate to that insight. And then I spent about 10 years working around the country, helping low-income students get access to higher education. And I saw, like, students in, you know, Native American reservation, or in Appalachia, or in the western slope of Colorado, or in the Bronx, and I saw incredible levels of adaptability, resilience, intelligence. The only thing I would add is that yes, you know, children and people earlier in their life that experience precarity have this almost like this sixth sense.
Right.
I would say, though, from if the goal is to support vulnerable populations in terms of upward mobility, on the one hand, there is this beautiful work of highlighting how they're already brilliant, and affirming them. That's really supportive. And then there has to be material interventions at specific junctures.
Yeah.
Which is a little, it's a little nuanced there. So yes to, you know, living in precarity and the kinds of skills that people develop, and then as a society, the specific levers. Like, for me,
Right.
when I was in high school, there was a CBO, a community-based organization, that just, like, took me to colleges. And so it was like, so I had this, like, skill set that you're
Right.
talking to navigate all these environments, but I was in the same environment.
Right.
And then I had this intervention
Yes. Yes.
that allowed me
exactly.
to
Right.
practice that skill in a
Right.
different context,
Right.
which opened up higher education and opened up, you know, having a career.
Yes.
So yeah, I think there's, like, that nuance of,
Exactly.
yeah.
But I think it's important to get beyond what's called the deficit model.
Yeah,
That these
indeed.
kids are edgy. These kids are always looking for the exits. They're not, you know, their skills might emerge despite their background instead of emerging because of their background. So to rehumanize is a really good starting point. And then to realize that's not all, because that's another way in which uncertainty itself is not the panacea. Uncertainty isn't the end of the story. There's so many incredible, important work being done, but uncertainty is the spur to attune to the world, but it's also that space of possibilities. And I think the skills, maybe, you know, and the interventions that can help in all different ways, in all different arenas of growth and resilience, but the skills related to reflection, to you know, stepping back, to understanding, those are uncertainty-based skills too. The person who knows to pause and deliberate in the middle of a challenging, uncertain situation. You know, it's not enough to just pick up on what's going on, although that can help you adapt. But there's also the reflection, the deliberation, the thinking it over. And these are some practices that I write about as well that are really, really important.
Yeah.
So that then you're supporting the whole child.
Exactly.
Through interventions and et cetera. So I think that, but I think that it's really complicated, because edginess is an extreme of the natural arousal we might all have, and to know when and where it's, most to choose the tools in your toolbox is really important for the context and situations. But I can't help but thinking that being aware helps you choose the tools better.
Yeah, and just to honor your thinking around uncertainty and being edge work.
Yeah.
And the connection between, edgy people or edgy children.
Right.
They're doing edge work. I mean,
exactly.
in a way,
No,
they're doing
exactly.
edge work. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So as we kind of begin to wrap up, I'm really struck with just how rich this work is, and my God, we could talk for hours. My mind is going so many different places. One of the things I may have shared is with you before. We were at an event together, and I think I was speaking about, one of the best things that we can do for other people, especially if you're in a role of a teacher or some kind of communicator, or in whatever role you're in, that you steward a community or a group, is to help people kind of fall in love with their own minds.
Yeah.
I and just think about some of your favorite teachers. Just like they were doing something, but they were doing something that allowed you to do something with your mind. And so I'm kind of struck by how your work really allows us not just to fall in love with uncertainty, because that's always going to be kind of a productive tension, at least for me.
Right. Yes.
I can fall in love with the awareness that uncertainty upregulates my capacity to deploy my full intelligence. Falling in love with uncertainty itself, that's
well, it's not a picnic.
It isn't.
That's why it's a challenge,
and
not a threat.
Yeah. But I think what it's bringing up for me is it's putting that into practice in terms of allowing people to fall in love with being able to develop nuanced responses to life circumstances.
Exactly.
And that's rich.
Yeah, no, that's very meta.
Yeah.
It's very meta. And one of the things that drove me many years it took to write this book was also offering a counterpoint to contemporary living, because I thought, to put it just a little bit different way, I wanted to restore faith in the human mind. Because so much of psychology had only studied, oh, you got this answer, is it right or wrong? Or, oh, you got this outcome. Or, oh, this is what happened in the scanner. Well, the whole murky, uncertain mind, as beautiful and active as it is, had been ignored. And now it's no longer. And so that kind of efficiency, outcome orientation has led us to, until recently, not know about the wonders of uncertainty, coupled with, technologies which really offer a certain type of intelligence. Again, outcome oriented. I mean, we're now, very, very closely melded with machines that have no second thoughts. And yet we as humans, there's so much that, in different kinds of uncertainty can take the form of a daydream, the what if question. Uncertainty can take the form of weaving the tapestry between each other. It can take the form of that deliberation in skill in the moment, drilling in with unsureness in your assumptions. It takes so many different forms. And wow, look at all of what's happening in the mind, that it's not, binary and easy and even calculated. So this, I think, to me, opens up, ability to fall in love with our minds, but also to understand that knowledge is only one part of the equation, that the frontier. So I keep saying, I think we're on the cusp of a seismic shift in humanity's approach to not knowing. And we can all be explorers and pioneers here.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's powerful. I want to come back to that in a second as before we close. But any last thoughts? Any last thoughts? Maybe one practice that folks can, apply in their day to day in terms of how to orient towards uncertainty.
Yeah, I think, practice dialing back on that outcome fixation in challenging moments. Um, just also, when we are faced with a complicated situation, I think, you know, don't be afraid of what I call take two.
Mm-hmm.
And so, top performers, superior experts basically inhabit the question and then look at multiple different possibilities, what's going on, all in a few minutes. This
Mm-hmm.
is not an hours long enterprise. Even in our fast paced society, we can just take two.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of something somebody says to you, could be a professional challenge, could be a disruptive child in the classroom. And, you know, that what we're really doing there, again,
Mm-hmm.
related to edge work, is allowing ourselves to just get over our assumptions, our biases, our expectations, all that knowledge which is so honed and so smooth and
Mm-hmm.
so second nature. That's how we operate in the world. Through the biases allow us to say, oh, I know what to do, or I know what this scene is, or I know who that person is. Well, maybe you don't.
Mm-hmm.
That little word
Yeah.
maybe. And then the last thing I'd say is that word maybe,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a myth that the word maybe is indicating weakness in the workplace or in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually not. It's actually a word that it's called a hedge word. And this set of words, sometimes, possibly, maybe, the hedge words are actually linguistically doing two things. One, they're signaling to people that there's something more to know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. And then secondly, they're signaling that you're approachable or you're accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Because shutting down words like therefore or you're wrong
Yeah.
shuts down the beautiful dynamic unknowns, aka possibility, that could be.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of that little word maybe.
Yeah. 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 Well, maybe you can restate because it was such a significant comment. I don't want to gloss over it about the seismic shift you feel like is happening.
Yes, because there is this gargantuan research that's just coming out on the psychology, the sociology, the anthropology, the education in and around uncertainty. Because we have this science, because we are living in this world of precarity where people are hungry to know what uncertainty is, for all these reasons, I'm actually hopeful because I think we're on the cusp of a huge change, huge opportunity in humanity's approach to not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing has been the bad guy
Mm-hmm.
way
Mm-hmm.
too long.
Yeah.
We've just set our sights and put our blinders on to something beyond not knowing. And what I mean, of course, is everything we've talked about, but not yet knowing, or partial knowing,
Mm-hmm.
or growth and change within the knowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a thing, it's that tapestry.
Yeah. So much. Thank you so much, Maggie. I have so many questions, so many questions.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So let's be sure to continue the dialogue. I want to encourage everyone to get a copy of Maggie's book, Uncertain: The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure. Just such a pleasure to have you with us
Such a
here at the
great
Acosta
conversation.
Institute, and I hope you all enjoyed the interview. Thank you so much for watching.